Well, I looked at the news this morning and I just saw a whole bunch of stories that really demonstrate how U.S. dominance over the Middle East really seems to be waning in the Trump years. And even if it is unintentional, I think that perhaps Trump's underlying instincts, despite the fact that he's broken his promises about pulling out of the wars and stuff and just ending things and bringing the troops home, Ron Paul style or something like that. I think that maybe his lack of commitment to the mission in his heart has led him to make decisions that undermined the mission in what to the extent that there actually is one in the Middle East, that being the mission of just maintaining dominance over those countries. What Trump's only focus seems to be is to make sure that he looks like he's tough and like he's being a hawk and that he's maintaining dominance and all this stuff. But he doesn't seem to actually care in his heart of hearts whether the U.S. actually does have control over all these countries. He just doesn't want to look weak. Now, it's not really fair to give him all the credit for the U.S.'s waning power in the Middle East. I think that this decline had already begun under Obama and arguably under Bush. I mean, you could say that I certainly would make the case that once Osama bin Laden successfully baited George W. Bush into Afghanistan, that America was at that point in decline because just as the Soviets had done, it was a big mistake to try and invade Afghanistan and tame it and turn it into some kind of West German style nation state. And so the empire has been bleeding for a long time now, but it still looked like it had enough vigor to keep going and to try and hang on to things in the Middle East, even if it was a lost cause. If you have enough stamina, you can survive even if you're fighting a losing battle. And so staying on the topic of Afghanistan, the first story that caught my eye this morning is that in the year 2019, the death toll for U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan is the highest it's been in years. Now, the headline sounds worse than what it actually is, because when you read the story, it was only 19 people. But considering how many years it's been, the Afghan war has been going on, and the fact that, frankly, we have not seen any progress being made in Afghanistan in many, many years. I'd make the case that the position of the U.S. in Afghanistan has only gotten worse over the years, but it's pretty much a stalemate. You could say, well, the Taliban's gained things here or there, but the lines have remained pretty much along where the how the ethnic areas go. The Pashto-dominated areas are still controlled by the Taliban. They've always been controlled by the Taliban, and the non-Pashto areas are, they're things that the U.S. are able to hold to some extent, even if there's, some violence on the margins where there might be a little bit of higher Pashto concentration. But it's not like the areas that aren't controlled by the Taliban are, in and of themselves a wonderful democratic nation state, with modern literacy and women's rights, like they like to tout. That's one of the things that they always throw out there. They say, oh, well, why are we still in Afghanistan? They say, oh, well, look, we've taught so many women how to read. We're there for women's rights. It's like, they're still in the 17th century there, pretty much. And the official government that's propped up by the U.S., the guys who are supposed to be so good and democratic, and the adults in the room, they're accusing each other still, I think, of stealing the presidential election. And it's also one of the most corrupt states on earth. So as far as you'd think, after being occupied by the U.S. for nearly 20 years now, that it would be an American showcase state. That this would be, little America. This would be an absolute. America's had its time to put its mark on Afghanistan and to make it into, remake it in its own image. And this is what we've ended up with. Empires of the past, whether it be Britain or Rome or the Soviet Union, given this much time, have been able to completely remake nations. But of course, the problem is that this is Afghanistan. Both Britain, the Russian Empire, and then later the Soviet Union have tried to tame Afghanistan. The British were smart and had a little bit more of a hands-off strategy. They didn't try and create this utopian neoconservative nation state. They instead set up a king that they patronized and who just imposed his will on the country and did not try and mete out all these ethnic hatreds. And so by contrast, as things, are as terrible as ever as they've been in Afghanistan, in Syria, a war which the U.S. Tried for years to encourage and to inflame, has had its least deadly year since it started back in, 2014, or was it 2011? I guess it was 2011 that the Syrian civil war started. And it's still a massive death count, nothing compared to the U.S. And of course, we don't have accurate numbers before I get to this, but I don't have accurate numbers on the total casualties in Afghanistan. Obviously, if you include in civilian casualties and Afghan security force casualties, the death count is much, much higher. In fact, yesterday alone, on Wednesday, or no, maybe that's 2 days ago, I can't remember now. On Wednesday, the Taliban killed 26 Afghan policemen and military men. And so in one day, the Afghan government had a higher death count than the U.S. did in all of 2019. So the Afghan war, probably, once we get the final numbers for this year, probably has a death count in the thousands too. But anyway, back to Syria. There was only 11,000 people killed there this year. And this, of course, I think might have been the first full year since Trump withdrew support and made the CIA stop funding al-Qaeda in Syria. So it became a lot easier for Assad's army to come in and mop those guys up and restore his hegemony over all of the Syrian territory, except for, of course, Idlib and now the northeast part. Yeah, but now, declining deaths, as I said, in Syria is actually a sign of a weakening America, because America was a major force behind inflaming that. And then, of course, just this week, we have the events in Iraq, which I think have been building up for a long time. I'm not at all surprised to see what's gone on in Iraq this week with the people there, a lot of them, even folks in Iraq who are not friendly towards Iran, getting upset with the U.S. for bombing Iraq without the government's permission, bombing Iraqi people just because they accuse them of being, Iran toadies, to borrow a phrase from that one New York Times columnist who appeared on Joe Rogan. Bari Weiss, that was her name, Bari Weiss. Of course, she called Tulsi Gabbard an Assad toady and was thankfully raked over the coals. But anyway, back to Iraq. I'm not surprised at all that there's now this conflict brewing between the U.S. and Iraq. The U.S. Fought a civil war on behalf of Iran's friends to install them, as the heads of the Iraqi government, while simultaneously labeling Iran their mortal enemy. So now they've installed their mortal enemy, in Baghdad. And they're acting completely surprised that people would be upset at this. And in fact, they're defiant and saying, oh, well, you know what? If you oppose what we did, well, then you're just an Iran puppet. And people say, yeah, we like Iran. That's who we are. And so the U.S. is showing no signs that they're going to try and reestablish their power there. They're not doing anything that is going to help their situation. They're just lashing out in anger. And I think that's all that the U.S. institutions know how to do these days. They're so used to being the most powerful country in the world and being able to get away with whatever they want that they don't know how to react when people just say no. And in doing so, they're exposing their own weakness, their inability to adapt to this situation, to be able to recognize that Iraq is controlled by very pro-Iran people, and having no intention of reconciling their policy with that reality will mean that eventually Iraq is going to be an enemy of the U.S. as well. The U.S. seems to be issuing Iraq, the Iraqi government, an ultimatum that, hey, you're either with us or against us, and I think they're going to end up being against them. And so this is 3 countries now across the Middle East that the U.S. has tried to assert its power to set up these, satellite states who are pro-U.S., and you end up in every case getting a situation where that is less fortuitous to the U.S. than when they intervened. Afghanistan, before the Afghanistan war, the Taliban were willing to work with the U.S. At least to some extent. They wanted to preserve their little caliphate that they had, or I'm sorry, their emirate. And the U.S. has made total enemies out of them and destroyed their country. In Syria, they wanted to overthrow Assad and install some pro-American government there. That failed. Now Assad hates America more than ever. The U.S. wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, who was for a long time an American ally, which the U.S. decided to no longer be an ally of for no real clear reason from what I've ever seen. And they installed, Iran's friends in that country, and then decided to make Iran their number one enemy. So these are the three countries that the U.S. really involved itself in the Middle East. And I'm not even counting Libya. I'm just talking about the Asian part of the Arab world. Well, Afghanistan's not Arab, so leave that out. I guess the Near East, what we call the Near East, not North Africa. Of course, if I wanted to be mean, I could include Libya too, because Libya is perhaps the greatest disaster of all, although I think that Libya will probably work out okay in the end. And I mean okay as far as American foreign policy is concerned, not okay from the standpoint of the people who live there. They're screwed no matter what happens. So I think we're going to get to a point here in the near future to where the U.S. Has to retreat from all these places, and if not in practice, at least in, or if not officially, at least in practice, they'll have to retreat. Because the only places to where they really have any appeal left are the courts of the Arab monarchies. And I guess, President Sisi in Egypt. But other than that, well, and Israel, but Israel's tiny. Yeah, so I think there will be a reckoning soon. When Iraq decides to kick out the last 5,000 troops that the U.S. has stationed there, which I think is going to happen pretty quickly, given the recent turn of events, I think that it might be a new world in the Middle East, one that none of us probably would recognize. It's not like the one we've seen, to where the U.S. plays a dominant role in the affairs of just about every country. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.